This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Welcome everybody to today's Economy Committee meeting. Members of the public may like to follow us on at London Assembly on X using the hashtag Assembly Economy. Please may I remind everyone to switch phones to silent and ask that members and guests ensure that electronic devices are not placed in front of the microphone. Guests and members are also reminded to position their microphone so that they can be heard clearly. If you need your microphone, please do so by picking it up from the base. Today, the main item of business is the committee's investigation into late payments. Before we begin, we have a few items of business to attend to. Can I now ask our committee officer to confirm any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies for absence from Assembly Member Clark.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendation set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interests to declare?
No. Noted.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to confirm?
Actually, on that, I own a small business. I think it's probably relevant to this debate.
Well, should we just add it just in case, and thank you for declaring that, Assembly Member Buff. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on 11th January 2024 to be signed by me as a correct record?
Agreed.
Can I ask the committee to note the completed and ongoing actions arising from previous meetings as well as the additional correspondence received? Can I ask the committee to note the completed actions taken by myself as chair, namely to agree the early years childcare in London report as attached at Appendix 1? No. Thank you very much. We now move on to our main item of business, which is a discussion with our invited guests on our panel on the committee's investigation into late payments. Joining us today are Laura Tim, the Greater London representative at the Federation of Small Businesses, Kate Dearden, Head of Research Policy and External Relations at Community Union, Liz Barclay, Small Businesses Commissioner at the Office of Small Business, Abdul Shiil, Co-founder and Director at Sahan Cares, Dawber, Deputy Mayor for Business at the Greater London Authority, and Alex Conway, Assistant Director for Economic Development and Programmes at the Greater London Authority. Welcome and thank you for joining us. Before I move on to the questions, I'm literally going to ask you to just give me 30 seconds for people at home and for the audience to just explain what it is that your organisation does and what you're representing. So, Laura, if we could start with you, please.
Thank you, Marina, and thank you everyone for being here. Good to see you all. I'm representing the Federation of Small Businesses. We are a not-for-profit organization that represents voices of small businesses, especially when it comes to speaking to the government and making sure that the voices are heard, taken into consideration, so the government also can make decisions that are cohesive and help small businesses who are the backbone of London. So thank you.
Thank you. Katie.
Thank you. Community is a trade union representing workers all across the UK economy. We have over 40,000 members, many of whom are self-employed and work across many different sectors. And as a union, we represent sectors all across the economy. We're affiliated to the TUC and the Labour Party, and are very passionate about working people, which is in the title, as you can imagine. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Liz?
I'm the Small Business Commissioner for the UK, and the Office of the Small Business Commissioner is an arm's length body of government of the Department for Business and Trade. Our remit is around about changing the payment culture in the UK, and that includes late payments.
Thank you very much. Abdul?
Hi everyone, my name is Abdul and I'm the co-founder and director of Sahan Cares. We are a social enterprise based in London. We offer care and support to the elderly and adults with disabilities, but we do it by providing employment to refugees who English isn't their first language. We train them how to speak English, we help them qualify and help them social care, and then we send them out to the community as care workers. So thank you so much for inviting me here.
Thank you. Howard?
Hello, thank you for inviting me. I'm Howard Dawber, I'm the new Deputy Mayor for Business. My remit here is really my role as champion of small businesses, as well as representing the GLA and looking at this issue. And as already been said, small businesses are the backbone of London. 54% of all Londoners work in a small business, and there are 1 million small businesses in the capital.
Thank you very much. Alex?
And I'm Alex Conway, Assistant Director for Economic Development Programmes, and my team's remit is to support the Mayor and Howard in all matters relating to businesses, big and small, in relation to sort of engagement, policy and programmes.
Thank you very much. So if we can start with our questions, and I will start off. My first questions, two of them are for Liz. Liz, please can you outline the definition of a late payment for both the public and private sectors?
Interesting that there's almost an assumption that there is a definition. Within some of the legislation, it is suggested that payments should be made in 30 days. So public bodies should pay in 30 days and small businesses in 10 days. In the duty to report legislation, big business should report payment performance, but there's nothing to actually say when a payment is late as such. What they are doing is reporting their private sector payment performance, how many invoices they're paying in 30 days, how many invoices up to 60, how many invoices up to 90. There's also the prompt payment code, which we administer, and the prompt payment code is a voluntary code through which businesses give a commitment to pay their small businesses, or at least 95% of the invoices from small businesses, within 30 days. The guidance says that 30 days means 30 days from receipt of an invoice. But again, and perhaps we can come onto this later, what does receipt of invoice mean? It is widely interpreted. Businesses should pay within 60 days. Unless there is no discussion about payment terms in a contract, in which case it would be taken that they were to pay in 30 days. However, contractually, businesses can pay in longer than 60 days if there is agreement and it is not grossly unfair to both of the parties involved. So again, it's quite a complicated issue through which there is guidance, and definition is very, very hard to come by. And we actually therefore find it extremely difficult to work out exactly what the problem is we're trying to solve. So if you have a contractual agreement to pay in 30 days after receipt of invoice, and your invoice isn't paid within those agreed terms, then it would be late. But if you've agreed to pay to accept payment in 120 days, to pay in 120 days, if you were paying in 119 days, then your invoice would not be overdue and therefore would not be late. So there's a bigger issue here, and that is contractual arrangements made between businesses The late payments are the ones that should have been paid within 30 days because that was the agreement, or where there was no discussion about payment terms and therefore they should have been assumed to be paid in 30 days and they're outside that payment term. So we find that people come to us assuming they should be paid in 30 days, only to discover that somehow or other they've created a contract, either verbally or written, that has created a longer, more extended payment term, and they're not actually out with the terms of those payments. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Absolutely, that's fascinating, it really is. But on the back of that, could you tell us how widespread the issues of late payments are to small businesses in the UK? Understanding, of course, what you've just said about there not being an actual definition.
And because there isn't a definition, isn't an absolute concrete definition, it's very hard to measure, and everyone's measuring the same different things. Now, if I were to look at the FSB stats, and I'm sure Laura will tell you what their stats say, I would see a different result than I would see if I looked at the Xero stats or the Sage stats. And Xero and Sage, of course, are two of the big cloud accounting companies. Sage says that on average, payments to small businesses are made within 19 days. The Federation of Small Businesses says they're made in a much longer period than that, and that around about 51% of them are late, so as in overdue. NatWest says in London 41% are overdue, and that actually London is worse off than some of the other regions of the UK. So the question is, what are we measuring? And for me, I think the point is that we all need to be measuring 30 days from the same time, the same starting point on the clock, or 60 days or 90, whatever it is. And we all need to be measuring the same cohort with the same data, because of course the Federation is measuring with their membership, quite rightly, and they have a different membership to the people who are banking with NatWest. So NatWest comes up with different details. I would say that if I were to take an average, pluck an average out of the air, about 47% of payments are late. But what I can't tell you is how many of those other payments are extended because contracts have been created either verbally or in writing that extend the payment terms beyond that 30-day payment period. But what I have to say is things have improved over the last 12 years because as technology has come in, payment terms, payment times, average days to pay have been reduced from around about 82 days 12 years ago to down to around the 30-something, 33, 34. People argue about whether it's 32, 36. So there has been quite an improvement in late payments over the last 12 years. What we still can't measure is extended payment terms.
Okay, thank you very much. Assembly Member Garrett.
Morning. That's actually quite useful context, Liz, particularly about this difficulty of definitions, and if you can't pin down exactly what you're talking about, it's hard to then agree about whether it's getting worse or better or what we should do about it. Just sort of moving from, you spoke about the national context, moving to the London context, and perhaps if I could ask perhaps Abdul and Laura, perhaps start with you, Laura, about specifically in London, what do you see in London? Because the data we have suggests, notwithstanding what we've just heard about, that's very hard to measure anything. The data we have suggests that London is worse than elsewhere. I don't know whether that's your experience or whether it's just... So what's the picture in London versus the national picture, perhaps?
Well, for London, the picture, and I back up what Liz was saying as well on the numbers, we measure what our numbers tell us. So we can then look at the timelines as well. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? So in 2022, we actually did a report which was called Time is Money, which is specifically targeting business owners and asking them how are they doing with the payments? Are they receiving the money or not? So 52% of small businesses said that they experience late payments in the term of longer than 30 days on average. About 25% at that time said that late payments were becoming more of an issue than it used to be as well. So late payments, that there were more late payments than they used to be previously.
Sorry, when was previously, just to get a sense, like 5 years ago, 20 years ago, what's the time
quarterly.
span?
So it was quarterly measurement, that quarterly before this was released in 2022, and the previous 3 months at that time, they had measured that they were struggling even more so than previously. And I think with small firms, what we've noticed over the years, it's harder for them to get monies from large corporates or large organizations. What often happens as well, because I'm part of various networks aside from the federation as well, is that large organizations often have what they call payment runs. And if your invoice is not included in that payment run, it means another month's delay for it to be even considered. On top of that, another 30 plus days. So you can easily wait 90 plus days to have your monies coming in for you to be able to pay your suppliers or your staff as well. London always, I say, is in its own bubble. And London usually recovers a lot faster as well. And I think one of the things that we've noticed surveying members recently is, number one thing is the economic condition in the UK and nationwide. But London seems to be more positive, and business owners seem to be more positive. But they are so largely and vastly impacted by cash flow. They cannot survive. And it seems to be different in various countries as well. Our representative Tina McKenzie as well, who's the policy chair, actually stated that comparing the other countries, it seemed to be more of a norm that small businesses in the UK and London should wait for payments. When other countries, there's more support on that side, or there's this expectation that small businesses cannot wait that long, so it's become more of a community and a norm that they should be paid faster, and usually it happens as well.
I was like a number, so being paid faster, what does that mean?
Within that 30 days, for example. For a small business, that's a lifeline. It would be ideal if it would happen within the 5 days that we've kind of asked for, but 30 days is something that we really advocate for. And I know that the mayor has, and we're very grateful, the mayor has been pushing for that as well, even from the local authorities and government side, to make sure that the small businesses do get paid at least in the first 30 days of receipt, I'm assuming, as we're talking about definitions.
Yeah, I'll come back that's a very interesting point about large and small.
I'll happily share some of the reports as well. We've just released a small business index as well, which is quarterly, where we ask our members how are they feeling about the economic conditions, what are the current main issues, but also the time is money report, which is specifically around this topic and how vastly business owners are influenced by late payments as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to, that would be very useful. I was going to say I'll come back in a moment to the impact and the causes. I just wanted to get a sense, first of all, about the scale. How common is it? So, Abdul, is presumably this is a common problem for you, is it?
So for us, what we're noticing is majority of our revenue comes from local authority contracts that we have. So from that perspective, actually local authorities do pay on time. So, and that's commendable to them. Where we struggle with is the ICBs, or formerly known as CCGs, where we're still, it takes 6, 7, 8 weeks to receive our payments from them. That's not nice. Luckily, we don't have a big contract with them, so we're able to subsidize that from other payments that we get. But it does leave a strain. And when speaking to other providers, especially with health and social care providers, majority of them are relying on their overdrafts because they haven't received their payment from sort of the ICBs. For us, we raised an invoice in November. We're in February right now, so we still haven't received that, but we've emailed them last week and we're hopeful they're going to get back to us. So that in itself is a struggle for small businesses. And if we had if majority of our revenue came from the ICB, I don't think we'll be running as a business. I think we'll probably be shut down.
Well, that's a pretty stark statement, isn't it? I mean, I was going to actually, my next question was going to be about the impact of it. So obviously one is about cash flow and where you're in theory are profitable, but you haven't actually got the cash. You've got to run your own payroll. You can't treat your staff the way that you're being treated. And then the other impact is which you've just hinted at, which I'm curious to understand, is even if you are paid in a reasonable amount of time, how much staff time do you spend chasing people to get the money? Presumably that's another impact.
That's another impact, chasing them up, because there's no one you can call it. You have to email them, and so that you're waiting for that email, right? So that's a frustration in itself. But the other side as well is the human side. The majority of our staff, all former refugees, all have families to feed. So that's a lot of pressure, because that mom has to pay for tuition for her daughter to go to school, and that's a lot of pressure on you as a business because you're feeling that. So when you're chasing, that's a disadvantage in itself. The other one that I would say that no one talks about is also your credit score as a business. So if you want to go to a bank and you want to take a loan, if you're thinking of scaling, well, the first thing that they do is they run a credit check. And if you're defaulting on payments, then that can have an impact on even thinking about scaling. So that in itself is a frustration for small businesses.
That's very useful. No, you're right. I don't think that had occurred to me when I was thinking about this issue. Thanks, Abdul. So, Laura, back to you in terms of the impact that it has.
I just wanted to add as well, because we were talking about this within the Federation as well. One of the big things that keeps on coming up more and more, and I back Abdul as well, the amount of time business owners spend not just on chasing up these invoices, but the level of worry and then the health and especially mental health impacts of that, unable to be able to focus on the business and the economy and adding to your community because you're constantly worried and spending your time, which is precious, trying to chase up invoices. And just the impact it's such a big part of building London with this big community that it is and how it's viewed internationally. London is viewed as a major city around the world, but it's really crippling for the economy for business owners to struggle this way. So I really say that the prompt payment code should be not just promoted, but also there should be more ways of actually making sure that businesses do actually follow it as well. It's one thing to sign up to it, but it's another thing. How do you then audit that and giving more powers also to the commissioner as well to be able to check that it's done actually properly and what the measures are then that those companies, let's say if the larger organizations, should not be able to get access to various government grants, because if they're not part of the community and supporting the community, then why should be they able to have access to those grants? Because they're actually not doing what they're applying for. They're not actually helping the community and small business owners. So we definitely call for more powers for Liz's office as well, because they are doing great work that small businesses appreciate.
I think we've got a section coming up about what should be done about it. We're in the how bad is the problem and what are the causes section at the moment.
I'll speak on that as well.
I'm sure there'll be plenty to say. Now, it's an interesting point that's come out though about going back to your point at the beginning, Liz, where you were talking about how there's not really an agreed definition. What's apparent is even if there were an agreed definition, you've then got this hidden cost of perhaps you get the number down by spending 4 hours a day on the phone and emailing people, but that in itself is a hidden cost because that 4 hours you probably could spend in a better way doing something else. So just coming on to the final bit of my sort of questions about the so you've spoken about how much is it and how extensive is it and what impact does it have. Thinking about the factors that contribute to it, we've heard a bit about this. I was interested in whether big businesses, like in terms of your creditors, whether it's big businesses are worse, small businesses are worse, public sector is worse. So we've sort of had a bit about that. I don't know whether you've obviously not been very positive about the NHS sector, Abdul, which is quite interesting in that differs from councils, which are quite good. And Laura, you mentioned about this payment run problem, whereby there's a ship that sails once a month, and if you miss this month's ship, you're done. Is that the only problem that runs in terms of the factors that drive it? Is that one of the big ones?
That's definitely not the only problem, but it's just one that I've come across over the years a lot, speaking to a lot of business owners. And even if you miss that first run, it does not mean that they then automatically add you to the next one. It often actually happens that you keep on chasing it up weekly, and then they'll come up with whatever reason, we forgot to add this to the next run. So it could be that you wait to get into that run for months at a time, and then you still don't know if you're going to get that money or when you will receive that money. It seems to be that larger organizations are just feeling very comfortable that they can do this because no one is actually doing anything about it, or no one is, giving them a slap on the fingers, or there's no consequences for them for them to not do this, basically.
Yeah, I suppose they're insulated from the consequences, perhaps, in a way that we were just talking about small businesses aren't.
Although these days accounting softwares are actually so great that this could be part of their, just something they input into the system and it's done. And it should be actually part of their practices as well, especially organizations that sign up to the prompt payment code. They should be part of the practices. But then, as I come back to the fact that how do you then audit that and how do you enforce that?
Understood. I don't know whether there was anything you wanted to add, Abdul, to what you said earlier about what seem to be the factors causing late payments, about different types of customer, different types of
I think this issue about payment run is so spot on. I agree with everything that was said. Also, for example, what we've noticed with local authorities is that if you do miss your payment run, then, for example, with one of the local authorities, we get paid every week. So if you do miss that payment run, or if they are short-staffed, then that payment run gets delayed to the next week. But then if you need to buy PPE that week for your carers, if you need to, you can't do that. So that has its implication. And we spoke about inflation, cost of living, everything is a lot more expensive for businesses to spend. Everything has gone up. Everything has gone up. So it's just getting paid on time really goes a long way, And also, I didn't mention this earlier, but in our last 10 years of running our business, and this might sound so basic, but every time we pay staff on time is our happiest time as an organization. We feel like we've delivered for them. And this is so basic, but the feeling doesn't get old. Over the last decade, whenever staff get paid on time, it's like a weight lifted off your shoulder. You're like, okay, great. And we never want to lose that feeling because, again, we're very close to our workforce and you feel the pressure that they're going through. You feel the struggles that they're going through. Electricity bills are going up. Everything is going up. So you feel that and you want to do as much as you can to be there for them. The least that they should expect is getting paid on time. So whenever we do pay, we feel like we're doing them justice.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think I don't have any other questions. I don't know whether anybody else wanted to add something on this. How often does it happen? How big a problem is it? And what causes it? Liz?
Can I just say there are, again, various figures on how long small businesses chase invoices, anything from a week a year to 3.6 hours every week. That is a big hit on productivity when small businesses are having to chase that. One of the biggest impacts is definitely mental health issues, and that has been growing throughout the small business sector over the last year exponentially. However, what I do have to say is that a lot of the big businesses are putting a lot of time and effort into improving their technology so that they can, and a lot of them do, the private companies do payment runs much more frequently these days, and also they're bringing on board their smaller suppliers, right down to their freelancers and sole traders, into their payment systems in order that they are paying them much more quickly. And during the pandemic, we saw payment times speed up, partly because private businesses understood that if they didn't pay their small suppliers, they wouldn't have anything to supply, or those suppliers would go to better paying organisations. And so we actually saw a lot of payments coming down to 14 days where they had been 30 days. So the question, again, as Laura has said, the question is, who came up with 30 as being ideal? For a small business like Abdul's, he would like to be paid much more quickly, and a lot of the big businesses are accommodating that. Where we see more problems is the middle range businesses where the boards don't support them in order to spend the money to improve their payment processes, or small to small businesses, because an awful lot of the small businesses are themselves waiting to be paid and can't therefore pay until they're paid on time. But just one more thing to pick up, I'm sorry, but all the public bodies are not paying within 30 days. And I have to say that is one of the big issues that we have got. We don't deal with public sector bodies, but if we do, we talk to the Cabinet Office. The legislation sits with them, but we do know that we get quite a lot of complaints about public bodies, organisations in public sector contracts, local authorities, NHS trusts, etc. So there is not, that has not been resolved by the legislation that says 30 days and 10 days.
Sorry, I've seen Howard. Just quickly on this thing about 30. So it just feels to me like doing a payment run every month feels like a world of like typewriters and checks written with fountain pens. I mean, to what extent is that the norm? Is that genuinely kind of a big issue, a big norm within businesses that they just run a payment run every month, and it hasn't occurred to them that maybe a computer could do it fortnightly, weekly, hourly? I don't know.
Are you asking me that?
Maybe
no.
yes.
As I've said, no, it is no longer the norm for a lot of the big businesses, because they're reporting into the Department for Business and Trade their payment performances, and they're trying to bring their payments down so that more of them fit into that 30-day bracket, and part of that is, more frequent payment runs. But there's still a cohort that hasn't, as I say, invested in improving the processes. And I think that's where the bigger problem sits. Not the big ones that have spent money, the middle-sized ones that aren't investing in better processes, digitalisation, bringing everybody into the same digital process, which would really help.
Yeah, so change is afoot, but
change is afoot. It depends how fast you would like it.
But the feet could move faster. Yes. Okay. So, Howard.
I was going to say I recognise a lot of that. I've in the last 2 years I've moved from working for a very large corporate to running a small business and trying to get large corporates to pay invoices on time to now here at the Mayor's office. And a lot of this is process. When I worked in large corporate, that monthly payment run was not actually about the computer systems or about trying to pay slower for whatever reason. It was actually about the sign-off procedure. So it was getting all of the invoices and all the payments into one place where somebody would then physically go through it, and that would happen, in the end that happened bi-monthly, but that was a huge jump to make it bi-monthly. The other thing we've found since we've been looking at our own payment systems here is that, of course, public sector systems are not designed to pay anything quickly. They're designed to be accurate and to protect public money. So to get it to move from that being incredibly careful, all those different levels of sign-off before money is actually released, to let's see if we can do this more quickly, actually requires people process change internally as well as the software system being changed. And that's the thing we're in the process of doing here at the moment, is working on how can we make systems that were set up to do basically something else act much more reactively and quick in terms of paying small businesses.
I think there's a will.
Sorry, did I see you waving, Laura, just quickly before I finish?
On just the wider impact, I just wanted to briefly add to that as well. The supply chain, even the small business industry, if a small business gets paid, they can also pay other self-employed or other smaller firms. So it's a bottleneck. If they don't get the money, they're unable to spread that money to their suppliers or to employees as well. And I think sometimes it's the impact on employee confidence as well. If they work for a smaller firm, they can sometimes sense that energy that the money isn't coming in, and being paid late and unable to pay your own mortgage, just the impact on the families as well then, and the fact that small businesses, without the cash flow, they're unable to invest in their own growth as well for the local community and the economy. So cash flow is a big concern. And yes, I do agree with some local authorities and councils, the payment terms and systems kind of seem to work a bit slower, but we have been very, very grateful to the Mayor as well for his strides, what he's been trying to push for. But you can set the example and ask for things, but this is where I always come back to the fact that who measures it and who enforces it, and how do you check that, and how do you improve that side?
Understood. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Polanski.
Thanks, Chair, and good morning, panel. Kate, I'm going to come to you in a moment about self-employed workers, but Liz, I just wanted to pick up on something you said at the very beginning, which you talked about the definition around receipt, and you said lots of people think different things. Could I ask, is there an example of what would be best practice, or what do you think businesses most want receipt to be considered as?
The date of the invoice is the same as the date of receipt.
Right.
Would be best practice, but very difficult to achieve, because Howard has just explained the processes, some of the approval processes that companies go through, and I think you're absolutely right in saying that an approval process can take weeks. And so if firms are interpreting receipt as being receipt in the accounts payable department, then the process that could have been gone through before that could be weeks longer. So that's what I would like, a definition of when the clock starts. ticking, so that then we know what we're measuring. Because if you say you're paying in 30 from the day of receipt, and it is the day of receipt, and it is the same as the invoice date, perhaps, then we know it's 30. But if you're paying 30 days end of month after receipt, that could be up to 61. And if you're paying 30 days receipt by the accounts payable department, that could be how long is a piece of string. So we need to be measuring the same things, otherwise we have no idea the extent to which the problem is we're trying to solve.
That's really clear, thank you. So Kate, how widespread is the problem of late payments for self-employed workers?
Thank you for the question. I might just run through what our self-employed membership, the makeup of our membership, just for the information for the committee, before we run into the experiences and what we've had with our membership and how we've been helping them challenge clients who have failed to pay. So at Community, we've found the majority of our membership are identify as sole traders, a lot also set up as limited companies, identify as freelancers, subcontractors, we're PAYE through an agency, fixed term contractors and partners. And for those who worked for a limited company, the majority were the director of that company or were an employee of the limited company. So it really does reflect the diversity of self-employment in and of itself. And as I mentioned, we've been doing a lot of work to work with our members to ensure that clients pay up and pay on time. Survey after survey, we find nearly 80% have told us that late payments had a negative impact on their finances. And we hear really disgraceful stories of our members having to chase late payments time and time again. As a consequence, they're pushed into their overdrafts. It's ticking over into the next financial year and therefore affecting their taxable income, and others simply just not being able to pay their home bills on time. A lot of our members are on the lower paid end of the spectrum, so really, a lot of the time can be living week to week, month to month, and those paying on time for those services and for their work is absolutely vital to make sure everything can tick by, never mind if they are part of that smaller figure on a membership who have staff to look after as well, and kind of what Abdul mentioned in his comments too. And we've had some members who might have worked for a client or numerous clients for maybe over a year and had those regular payments, with a contract that's stipulating regular payments too, and then end up for numerous months in arrears, losing thousands of pounds. So that might be a client that they had a previously good relationship with, and I guess it just shows kind of how fragile that could be, manipulated or exploited if a client doesn't want to pay up on time. The impact on their mental health, as we've heard from members of the panel, the impact it has on also going for a mortgage and worried about what that might look like on their figures and on their bank accounts, their VAT liability accruing, and so much more. And I think that impact on their financial well-being has definitely come through for us, missing those direct debits and going to their overdraft, as other members on this have sort of mentioned before. So we obviously want to get their money back into their pockets and back into local communities. It's absolutely vital, and we as a union have been doing that and helping our members, whether it's kind of looping us into correspondence with clients, and usually 99% of the time that has worked, which is a good thing. And we've sort of helped members look over contracts and walk them through the small claims procedure, through the small claims court, if it doesn't end up in the client paying on time. But too many of our members have to turn to us as their union to help them chase those late payments. Of course, as a union, that's what we are here to do and what we want to do. But obviously, it would be beneficial to have a more viable and effective route for resolving payment concerns, which I think we've alluded to maybe take in the next section. But there's clearly a problem, especially for our members who are lower paid. A lot of them by themselves, working for themselves. We've heard about the time it takes to chase that payment and the lost money in terms of income and extra business that they could be focusing on and spending their time on. Instead, they're spending too much time chasing late payments, and it has a knock-on effect to everything when they really are reliant on that pay coming in.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Now, Abdul was talking earlier about how he manages the kind of cash flow where you subsidise late payments with a more reliable contractor. How do self-employed workers do it? How are they managing that cash flow when they're not being paid on time?
I think they're struggling. Particularly the past couple of years with the cost of living crisis, a lot of our members came to us struggling for how they pay for their own energy bills. I think the challenge of going into overdrafts and how that looks, as I mentioned, if you want to get a mortgage or you're struggling to look for other clients because you're still chasing for one, and how that might look in terms of your business. Some can be worried in chasing that payment because it might ruin a relationship or word might get around that particular sector. So basically not very well.
Right.
I think they are really struggling. And as a union, we've had to set up a fund to support our members, not just our self-employed members, a lot of members who have been struggling the past couple of years in a very difficult cost of living crisis. But we are then having to support them through our own funds to help them get through, when they are really, really struggling. So I think it's difficult.
Thank you. And this may be the same answer, in which case don't feel like you need to repeat yourself. But what impact do late payments have on London's workforce that are employed by small businesses?
I think it's pretty similar.
Yeah,
if you don't get your pay packet on time, then how are you going to pay for your bills? How are you going to put food on the table and pay for everything else that we have as outgoings every month? So I think the knock-on impact is pretty similar.
Makes sense. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Garrett again.
Thanks. Just a quick one to you, Howard, if I may. I think you possibly sort of intervened and answered this question earlier, but anyway, the question we had here was what role you think you have as Deputy Mayor to sort of to get involved in either getting a grip of, improving, helping some of the problems that obviously we've heard about this morning. So I think you possibly mentioned some of it earlier, but unbeknownst to you, I had it as a specific question later on.
Sorry.
That's all right.
One of the reasons I was very pleased to be invited to join the Mayor's team is that for the last 20 years in my role at Canary Wharf Group, we ran a supply chain initiative called, which started as a local business liaison office of Canary Wharf, and then became the East London Business Place, which I have to say was part funded through most of its existence by LDA and then by European money to expand its operation, and that was a very simple proposition. The job was, how do we make sure more contracts from Canary Wharf at that time went to small businesses and expand the sort of the economic impact of Canary Wharf into the local communities that it worked with. But what we found was a whole load of barriers, invisible barriers, to prevent small businesses from accessing those big contracts. And part of that, one of those was about speed of payment. One of those is the point that Abdul made, which I cringed inside when you said it, that you said, luckily, we don't have more contracts with the NHS. Yeah. It's like, you should have loads of contracts with the NHS. You're exactly the sort of business that the NHS should be contracting with, and it just made me think, God, something's wrong there. If you're feeling, I'd rather not have more exposure to that big potential customer. So that's something we need to look at. I've had a long history of working with small businesses and helping them to get contracts, both with big private sector players, but also with the public sector. And that initiative did very well. It helped local businesses get £2.5 billion worth of contracts over the time it ran, many of which were in the end with public sector bodies. So I want to bring that spirit here, and I think we've got two roles really as the Mayor's Office. First of all, through our initiatives like Grow London Local, launched last week, we can help businesses with advice on how to go through the procurement process. We can look at where we can support businesses tendering, having the right documents to go through the tendering process, and really champion the use of small businesses in the supply chain across London. And the second thing we can do is to go by set a good example. And I do appreciate the comments made on the panel that clearly this is something that the Mayor does care about. We launched our responsible procurement policy a couple of years ago. We have set ourselves an ambitious target to get our old creaky systems across the GLA family to deliver a 10-day payment for small businesses. We're not quite there yet. Some of the GLA family members are there. GLA itself is not quite there yet, but we're not far off, and we're going to keep working on the issues that prevent those payments being made. And Alex can talk a little bit more in detail if you want to know about why we haven't quite hit that target, because that's new information, I think, to the committee that we've dug out in the last few weeks, which is quite interesting. But to act both as a champion, to show by good example that it can be done, and then to help other public sector bodies through our experience to go through the process so they can get better. So CCGs, for example, is something we are definitely going to take up and see where we can help them with our experience to improve their processes and get faster.
Thank you very much. I don't want to prevent you from giving us good news, but one of my colleagues does have a specific question about that. So if you can keep that in your back pocket for a little while, I'm sure that question will be coming up in a little while. But thanks, Howard, and that's it from me. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Hirani.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are actually for Liz, because they focus on the Office of the Small Business Commissioner. Now, you already, in your opening remarks, give an overview of the office and your role. So maybe if you can focus your answer to my question on the impact that the office has had and the Commissioner's had so far in the issue of late payments.
Again, very interesting question, very hard to measure. If you're measuring in numbers as in outputs, then small. If you're measuring in outcomes, try nailing jelly to a wall probably would be easier to measure. But we do know that we have an ever-increasing number of people coming to the website. 300 and odd thousand a year come to the website to find information to help themselves to resolve payment crises, we think. The problem we have got is that small businesses will not ask us to intervene, and somebody has alluded to this earlier, probably Laura, because small businesses are very fearful of third-party intervention. Yep. What they do not want, Abdul's just said yes, what they do not want is a situation where the company they're complaining about knows that they are the complainant because they're very fearful of losing the next piece of work. That's the same reason why they don't chase up invoices in the first place, and we know that around about 15% of invoices go unpaid every year, simply written off because small firms will not chase them up because they are fearful of losing the next contract. It's the same reason that they don't charge interest on overdue payments when they could do, because they're fearful of losing the relationship with that business. And we do know that when people phone us, come and inquire, they're very, very reluctant to give us their details, reluctant to tell us which company is not paying them or is paying them late, very reluctant, and very, very rarely do they allow us to go ahead and investigate. But they are asking us for information that will allow them to help themselves. And when you have people helping themselves, the outcomes could be wonderful, but it's very hard to nail that down. So my ambition for next year is to find a way of measuring the impact that we are having, because anecdotally we know that companies are coming to us saying, we mentioned your name and we got paid, a bit like Kate was saying. We simply said we'd contacted your office and we got paid, but we don't know what the vast majority of that 300,000 people are, what the outcomes are. So we really do need to know much more about the impact, because certainly the figures show low output, but that's not our impact.
It's interesting you mentioned about more people sort of going onto your website, and you can see sort of the hit numbers. Is that do you monitor or track that? Is that people looking at search engines trying to find
Yes,
information?
we measure. Yeah, we measure everything we can possibly measure in terms of what they're coming to look for, what they're finding, because we aim to make that a much, much better resource for people if we possibly can. Because, again, another ambition for me is that nobody comes to our website and doesn't get the information that they need when they get there. But we also, I think, need to do a bit of work on helping people to have the confidence to negotiate better payment terms in the first place. Because, again, that's the fear factor. And small businesses will tell us they were bullied, they weren't given a choice, they were simply told take it or leave it. You'll be paid in 60 days, 90 days, whatever, take it or leave it. But actually, in a lot of cases, small businesses that I've met have actually said to me, I didn't know I could negotiate. I didn't realise, I thought that legally I had to take what I was offered. And that's a terrible place for small businesses to be in, because it means that the imbalance of power is driving people to accept contracts, or not walk away, because sometimes the best thing to do is to walk away from that 120 days payment term, because you know that you're not going to be able to manage your cash flow over that period of time. But it is about trying to build in some confidence into the system. On the other hand, we've got to get the bigger businesses to understand you can't afford to lose that talent, because if that talent walks away, it will go somewhere else that pays them better. And so it's a circular argument.
Just in terms of enforcement and powers, so the government has committed to broadening the powers of the Small Business Commissioner. What will these additional powers be, and when do you think they are likely to be introduced?
When will we have an election? Who will be elected? What will the legislative process be? How long will it be before more powers in the payment space are a priority for someone? Because they're so far have not been a particular priority. I would like to be able to investigate if a third party, if you came to me and said, I know that my small businesses aren't getting paid because of this firm not paying, I would like to be able to investigate that without having to rely on that small business complaining to me, because I think that puts an awful lot of people off. It's the fear factor. Whereas if you were coming to me and saying, we think this needs investigated. So I think that is a power that may be under consideration. But again, it takes legislative change. Okay. Every power that I would like would take legislative change. And I have also said that I'm not willing to accept additional powers without the resources to deliver them, because if that's the case, then we're raising expectation and unable to deliver. And as Laura has said before, we have to be able to monitor, evaluate the value of legislation and enforce it. Otherwise, we're writing legislation that's unenforceable, and what's the point? So I think there's a long process to be gone through here of debate and consultation before we get to the legislation that will make the changes to the office.
Okay. I mean, you alluded to it slightly. There's been a lot of turmoil, if you like, with probably about 3 or 4 business secretaries over the last couple of years. Is that volatility or turmoil as such having an impact on making some of those long-term decisions that can impact small businesses?
I think it has. But we're in a really good place at the moment because we've had a statutory review. That has taken a year to do. That was published in November. So there has been that volatility and that impact. However, the team, having gone through that statutory review, I think the team of officials at the department really understands the issue behind late payments, extended payment terms, really gets the difference between long and slow, gets the reason that I'm asking for research, gets the reason that additional powers, not all may be good, but some additional powers may work. So we have a really good committed team at the department. And of course, the other turmoil was that the department split in 3, and so we lost some of our longer standing officials. Churn of any sort is really disruptive when it comes to getting people to understand issues like this. But I think we're in a brilliant place at the moment, and I think that as long as those officials stay, then we will be able to short, medium, long-term ambitions.
Okay. Just going to the prompt payment code and changes that were made in 2021, so about 3 years ago now. Has there been any noticeable change in reducing late payments to small businesses since the strengthening of the prompt payment code?
More firms have signed up. However, we also note that at times businesses are withdrawing from the code because they simply cannot meet the 30-day requirement, the requirement to pay at least 95% of invoices to small businesses within 30 days. That's the bit that came in, the new bit that came in, and that's the bit that is really difficult for a lot of big businesses, medium-sized businesses in particular. And I think we've got to be very careful. I would rather have them in the code, because if they're in the code, I can at least contact them. I have some leverage. If they're not in the code, they don't have to engage with me at all. So I'd prefer not to lose organisations from the code because they're having difficulty meeting that 30-day requirement. I would prefer to work with them to get to the point of the 30-day requirement. And so we're seeing more firms hitting that target now, but we're still having to work with them. We're still having to allow them leeway. And quite often it's because they're putting new processes in place. So they're putting in new systems. Quite often firms that have hit all the targets then put in a new, better system. It takes about 18 months to bed in, and their payment terms dip, their payment times, dip within that, while they're installing and embedding that new system. But then they come out the other end. So my view is that we don't kick them off the code if they're putting in a new system, because we need to support them through to keep them on the code as a member. However, I think the code is not suitable for small businesses, and we have a lot of small businesses signed up to it because they love the purpose of it. They want to be able to pay their other small businesses within 30 days, but actually many of them can't commit to that because they're waiting to be paid themselves. And so they are struggling most to hit that 30-day target.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. Laura, I'm going to turn to you because you earlier you also talked about powers and penalties in one of your responses to the committee. What more powers would you like to see in terms of on the enforcement side?
Well, definitely, we believe that with more powers for the commissioner, they'll also need more resources as well. You can give power, but you need to be able to also utilize that power as well. So definitely, and I really commend the work and the understanding that small firms are harder to comply with that, which makes sense. But definitely more powers and resources to be able to audit as well. Companies that have signed up to this could be considered not eligible for any type of grants of funding or procurement processes, because if they've signed up to this and they intend to be part of creating London as a prompt payment culture ecosystem, then they should also then follow that in order to be part of that system. These are just some examples, and I'm sure Liz has great ideas that she can share as well from her side, but definitely more powers and resources to be able to not just look at all these reports. It's more about what can we do about this, and where's the legislation that actually backs this up as well, and what are the consequences for those organizations that do not follow and do not try. And I think it's one thing being unable to do so and getting some support throughout the process to be able to comply and be part of this prompt payment culture as well that we can create. And those companies who just want to kind of have that green tick that we're showing you that we want to be part of this, but our aim actually is not to make changes or not to look at systems and processes that can support that. So.
Yeah, good. So I did want to turn back to one of the things that Liz said about people leaving the code as well. But in terms of the wider picture since the reforms or the changes in 2021, are you still seeing sort of a net gain in businesses? Yeah.
Yes, we are. Businesses invariably want to do, many businesses want to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. And they want to be seen to be doing the right thing because, of course, it's really beneficial if you're seen to be on the code and therefore a quicker payer. But firms that cannot meet the targets will either withdraw or we will eventually ask them to leave if we've not been able to help them through to meet those targets. But the question for me is how to audit, because there is nothing with which to audit against. I have absolutely no way to tell whether a firm is doing what it's signed up to do, because the only available data comes from the duty to report data reporting scheme, which is for big businesses, but they're all reporting whether they pay invoices in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. There's nothing to tell me whether or not they're paying small businesses in that 30 days. So I have got nothing whatsoever to audit against at the minute, and I can't see that coming. So if you give me the powers to audit, I can't deliver. So again, we have to go back and really think carefully as to how we how we progress the code. I would like it to be aspirational. I would like it to be behaviour and principles led, where firms are signing up to say, we are absolutely going to adhere to this. But that's a culture thing, and culture change takes an awfully long time.
Thank you. Before we move on, we're going to take a 5-minute break. So if everyone could be back at 3 minutes past 11, please. Thank you.
want to say that thank you, panel. You really have highlighted some very complicated areas that I think have been really risen out by the conversations that we've had today, that I think a lot of people who are watching this wouldn't have realised, and I really appreciate the clarity that you've been explaining everything. One of the things that Laura's been talking about is the need for the Small Business Commissioner role being strengthened, and powers and resources, which you've also said that you would appreciate the resources definitely with the powers. But the thing that you mentioned, Liz, was training businesses to negotiate better contracts. So I'd like to talk to Kate and Abdul and see, what do you think that difference would make, particularly for your businesses and the people that you represent, Kate? So Abdul, do you want to go first?
Could you just repeat the question again? Sorry.
Liz mentioned that it's complicated, the powers that that would make a difference. Training, though, businesses to negotiate better contracts could be something that her office could provide. Is that something that you would appreciate?
Absolutely. Like for us, because of again, majority of our business comes from local authorities, and I don't think that's a remit that Liz teams cover. But if they did, that would, all the help, I'll take it. Yes, I want that help, because I was just speaking to Howard just now. If, for example, the majority of our revenue came from the NHS, we would go bust, because we can't wait for those payments to come through. It's challenging for the business. So then, as a business, it you see an opportunity of scale, but you don't want to take that because you know the stress that comes with it. And businesses should be encouraged to scale. So that's an area that needs to be looked into.
Okay, would you agree with this? That's something that's been raised by some of the members as well from you.
Yeah, for sure. We help a lot of our members, whether it's looking over contracts, advising on things that they should include, what best practice might look like, to try and support them as much as we can. So I think further support on that would definitely be helpful for a lot of people who might be just starting out as self-employed and not sure, what to include and what not to include. So I think that'd be helpful.
One of the things... Oh, sorry, Liz, do you want to come in?
Could I just add something on that? And that is the problem, that we don't have any registration scheme for small businesses, so we don't know who they are. And they've probably already contracted before we get to them, or before they become members of the FSB or the union, and we're finding that they've accepted a contract, formed a contract, sometimes without realising they've done it, with accepting terms that they haven't understood. So catching them once they've flown into the wild is an extremely difficult issue for us. And quite often firms don't contact with us until they're absolutely on their uppers and about to go bust, and that's when they ask for help. So that in itself is a difficult one. How do we get the information out?
Are you saying it's too late sometimes?
Much too late sometimes.
Thank you. I mean, one of the things that for me, when I was reading through this, I was thinking that one of the powers could be a legislative power, could be actually like a punishment. But then you mentioned, Liz, that's not something that would work properly within the businesses. So if it's not to name and shame or kind of punish a business, and you were nodding as well, Abdul, that's what you don't want to do. What can we do to kind of encourage business practice to improve? What would be the best steps? Liz, you can come in, and Abdul, I'd like to hear from you too.
I don't say we wouldn't, and we have named and shamed, and we've kicked people off the prompt payment code, etc. But just to give you an example, one business that we took off the prompt payment code for poor payment practices, we had 6 complaints against them before Christmas this year. They don't have to engage with me. So we had absolutely no way to engage with that company to discuss the payments and the complaints. So I've lost them. They've gone. They may have been named and shamed, but it's made no earthly difference whatsoever. The press would have picked it up. There would have been press notices, but it hasn't helped. However, there is a role for thinking about how we broadcast the fact that we are taking steps, because obviously firms signing up will think, I've got to adhere to this, otherwise I will be in that position of being named and shamed. So there is a bit of that, but it's also about sharing that best practice. It's about lauding people who get it really right, get it really good. And we do that too. Good Business Pays is another organisation that produces tables of fast payers, and everybody wants to be on the fast payer list. They also produce tables of poor payers, and nobody wants to be on that list. But I come back to the point I made at the beginning. If we're not all measuring the same thing, if we're not all measuring the same 30 days or 60 days, we could get ourselves in very sticky ground legally from firms saying, hang on a minute, we pay in 30, they pay in 60, in effect, even though they're claiming to pay in 30, and yet their reporting shows them paying in 30. But that's not the real, so we've got to be extremely careful what it is that we're measuring before we set out to
I'm
really
going to come
use
back
the
to
stick.
that as well, but Abdul, do you want to come in?
The only thing I would add to that, the fear element is very real.
Yeah.
Because, especially with some of the local authorities, you want to apply for future tenders, and you don't want to be on their bad books, because that's going to have an effect on future business.
That's
so
really
you
interesting.
cannot
Yeah.
go against them because they won't forget. And again, if you're thinking of scale, what do you then do? So when Liz was speaking about that, I was nodding my head the whole time. I was like, I hope the panel don't ask me who, because I don't think I'm even going to share that.
I mean, it's quite scary for you, isn't it?
It's your livelihood, and it's a livelihood that people depend on. So again, I go back to this pressure of doing right by your staff. You want to do right by them. You want to get those contracts, because then they can take their family on holiday. They can save up for a deposit for a council house. What are those things that they go through? So, yes.
Thank you. I mean, one of the things that I've also picked up on is, and Laura was talking about this as well, the impact on the prompt payment code. Now, it's a voluntary code of practice, and I think the FSB have had some concerns about that. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about, what I think you'd rather it not be voluntary? Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, you're correct in that, but obviously at the moment it is. And I think it's, as Lee said as well, it's more of the cultural thing, and I mentioned it as well. Becoming a prompt payment city and country, to be fair. And I think some of the other things I just want to back up as well with Abdul and what Liz and Kate all have said, is to support small businesses who are self-employed often don't even know that is out there. Or if you're faced with getting some work in and you're basically faced with a choice that they can go to any other provider, so they tell you exactly this is the terms, you either take it or you leave it. So small firms or self-employed don't feel firstly that they have that negotiating space or the choice, because they need to pay obviously themselves and whoever they work with as well. There is some legal help out there, but as Liz said, often enough people just don't know about it. The FSB does a lot of work with our members as well, with the legal helpline and templates how to deal with the issues like these. Last year we did some webinars with NatWest as well, helping small business owners and self-employed understand how to even approach situations like this, and what support you can get in order to chase up late payments as well. But often enough, one of the big issues is the fact that self-employed and small businesses don't know about the support and what to do and what rights they even have. But secondly, the time and resources. If you're self-employed, it usually then means that you'll sleep 2-3 hours a night, because you can't just handle everything and deal with the late payments as well. But yeah, I definitely come back to this being more of a requirement than not.
Do you think this is interesting in terms of the fact that there aren't enough businesses that know about the support and the help that you're... Is that something that perhaps the Mayor of London could play a role in?
Oh, absolutely. But even the Grow London local website is actually such a welcome resource, and we collaborate on that as well with the Mayor's office. So it's a resource. Sometimes it just takes time to also create the understanding what the resources are. But definitely, even if you have those resources, still, especially self-employed, and me and Kate were talking about this, they feel more vulnerable that I either get this contract or this could be offered to another 100 self-employed or small businesses, so I might not be able to pay my bills. So it's definitely that fear factor as well.
Yes, Liz.
Could I just add, the same reason that small businesses haven't got time to chase up payments is the same reason they haven't got time to do training courses, etc., that are made available to them. If we make the prompt payment code compulsory, we don't need the code, because we're simply saying you must pay the invoices within a certain period of time, so the code wouldn't be required. But the enforcement would, and I don't know how we would enforce that for 5.6 million businesses throughout the UK. So, you know, we've got to be sure that we're not just writing useless legislation.
Are you worried that you can't get the enforcement because you haven't got the resources to do that?
No, because we have no way to check.
You've got no
I mean,
way,
again,
because
I
no
come
way
back
of measuring.
to that point. I have no way of measuring.
Right, excellent. That makes it very clear. I'd like to kind of just on that point of getting the Mayor of London's office to support, and the Deputy Mayor mentioned the responsible procurement policy. Alex, could you give us a bit of explanation whether that kind of work is happening, where you're raising the profile of the Office of Small Businesses and what Laura was just saying about the need for more businesses to know about that support?
I think that's a fair question, Barclay, about what we're doing to make people more aware of the Office of Business Support. I probably need to think a bit more about what more we could be doing there. It's been very interesting. It's been a learning experience for me hearing sort of colleagues talk about the sort of national situation. It's made me conscious that I'm quite aware of what we're doing in London, and we can and what the GLA is doing, and we can come on to that in a minute. But I've been perhaps less aware of the many variables nationally. To some extent, I'm taking some comfort actually from what we're doing at the GLA, where I think, as you know, our responsible procurement policy sets a target that at least 90% of undisputed invoices from SOPs are paid within 10 days of receipt. And I've heard that the FSB and others are rightly challenging that could we do even more. As I said, we're making good progress towards that target, but we're not there yet. But compared to how other areas are doing, I think feels like there's a good story
just
overall.
On that, in terms of working with small businesses and making sure they were aware of the help and support that they could get, is that something that you're working on?
Well, I think we should probably talk to Liz about how we could do more.
Great. So you will be doing that. Brilliant. That's good action from this point, from this meeting. Thank you. And Laura, we were touching on the Procurement Act as well, and the reforms that should be expected on small businesses and late payments. What impact do you think that's going to have?
Oh, definitely. The Procurement Act is such a big part of this as well, and especially setting terms that a set number of small firms should be allocated contracts as just a normal code of conduct or a normal way of doing business, because small businesses are the backbone of London, so they should also be part of the procurement chain as well. Other things as well, what often happens is if there's a larger contractors as part of the procurement processes, they often get paid first still instead of the small firms. So that is something that we'd hope that there would be more emphasis on ensuring that the small firms as part of those contracts get actually paid first. So that could be something that could improve on. Any proof about enforcement as well, because it's one thing to set the standard and they ask, it's another thing, how do we enforce that?
And I'll just wrap up with my last question, which is, Laura, you can carry on with what you've been just saying in terms of the government as well, in terms of their positioning here. I kind of got the impression from Liz that there's a need for a general election, and I don't know if that, am I correct? In maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but is there a lack of priority when it comes to the government? And have you, in your own work in FSB, in your lobbying, do you feel as if there needs to be more done in terms of prioritising small businesses, particularly on late payments from the government? And what would you like them to do to address this issue?
I think as representing all of our members, it often is it can get very emotional for us because we see how it affects the small business owners. So that's why we're often so resilient and so straightforward with our feedback as well. But even when it's been hard to hear, I think, at least in my experience, the mayor's office has always kept the door open, even when the feedback has been harsh. So we've definitely appreciated that, and I know they are trying their best, and the government as well. Some more than others, but the FSP always just continues representing our members, and I think one of the big things is always the collaboration with other organizations as well, and it's been great to hear internally from the FSP how much they appreciate the commissioner's role and the things that she's working on as well.
And Kate, what about from your perspective? What actions do you think need to be addressed by the government on this issue?
We want to see so much more action from the government in actually supporting the self-employed and freelance section of the workforce, not just on late payments, but on a whole raft of changes, looking at safety nets so they are more resilient if experiencing situations like a late payment. But obviously we want to make sure that doesn't happen. We would like to see longer term a freelancing without fear model to tackle the challenge of late payments, so it can be prevented earlier on in the client-supplier relationship by ensuring both sides have a right to a written contract, and that written contract is in place, which clearly spells out the deliverables, a timetable for payment, and the best point of contact in that client organisation if there are any issues. There's a good example of this in America, in New York, with the Freelancing Isn't Free Act, which makes such contracts mandatory for any engagement which amounts to over $800 over a 4-month period. But we'd like to see that as sort of a right and straight away in terms of that written contract, and for the government to look at that, and they haven't expressed any indication yet to do that. We obviously will be looking very closely at manifestos when we get into that election time, and would hope to see a significant changes in action on late payments around that automatic right. And also we've touched on the Small Business Commissioner and what might be possible going forwards in terms of remits and the role and resource of the office, which we would agree with all the comments that have been made on the panel. And I would just end with, I think there's, for us, a huge challenge at the moment with self-employed and freelance workforce, that power imbalance and the bargaining power of self-employed and freelance workers, and the ability to sort of have perhaps an index where you can sort of be empowered, and there's a source of information there for freelancers and small businesses who they might wish to contract with, who are the repeat offenders of late payments, and have just a bit of that transparency of who they might want to work with and who are the offenders to avoid. I think would also be quite helpful. It's more of a softer fix than actual legislation, but we would like to see all those changes, and I would just end on the terms, which has obviously been a topic of discussion, whether it's 30 days, 60 days and more. We would like to see legislation to make payments beyond 60 days unlawful, and sort of see that culture change to make payment in 30 days the norm. It would be hugely effective for the self-employed and freelance workforce in particular.
Thank you. Liz, you wanted to come in?
I just wanted to clarify. I think what small businesses want is certainty. Whether that, we know there's an election coming up was what I was alluding to. Small businesses need certainty because they don't invest without that certainty. However, what I would say, whatever government is in place needs to understand what it means to be the backbone of the UK economy. It is a phrase that I have picked up many politicians on, because I think they don't understand anatomy and they don't understand what being the backbone actually means. And if you don't support the backbone, the whole body collapses. And my point would be that if and this is a velocity of cash argument, if we get the cash to the small businesses faster, they will spend it. They will improve their training, their recruitment, their upskilling, their equipment. Everybody gains right up the supply chain if that is the case, because they're getting better services and products from the smallest person right through the supply chain. We need that money to be getting to them quicker, and it has huge social value, huge community value, and levelling up potential.
Abdul, I'm just going to leave the last word to you in terms of the government, because do you feel as if you're hearing those words about, in terms of what Liz was just saying, politicians saying that small businesses are the backbone? is that really coming through to you in your everyday life as in this world?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a phrase that you hear. Small businesses are the backbone of, the UK. That's great. Pay us on time. That would be great. And as a social enterprise, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of impact that we want to do within our community. So us getting paid on time means we can do X, Y, and Z within the community. You can't, again, the government might not solve everything. So you've got social enterprises, small businesses up and down the country that want to do great social value within their own community that aren't able to do that because they're not getting paid on time. So we can talk about different legislations, but just pay people on time.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Garrett.
Yeah, it was an observation, actually, and then a quick question. The observation was, you made me think, Abdul, when you were talking about the fear factor. Well, everyone was talking about this fear factor. And it made me think of the recent story about Fujitsu and everything that's gone on with the post office and the fact that it turned out to be illegal in procurement, public sector procurement processes, to take into account everything that had gone on. I'm choosing my words very carefully, but everything that had gone on with Fujitsu and the post office turned out to be illegal to take that into account, which seems in contrast with what you're talking about. My question, though, and it's sort of an elephant in the room that's been, that everyone's sort of perhaps. Anyway, Liz, you've spoken about how you can encourage businesses to do better and the fact that the measurement problem is difficult and the enforcement problem would be difficult. So my question is, to what extent is it, for some businesses, a deliberate choice to pay late? Because obviously it improves their own cash flow. We've heard about the problems it creates being paid late. Obviously it creates a benefit if you are the late payer who gets your payment in on time. So to what extent is that part of the problem? And presumably that's a hard problem to do much about.
It may well have been part of the problem, yes. It may well still be part of the problem. The former boss of Iceland used to call it the 3 squeaks factor. If you didn't squeak at the prospect of not being paid for 120 days, then that was acceptable. If you then didn't squeak when you were paid late, then next time you wouldn't squeak until at least that point in time. And that's how a lot of firms did operate. I think that is less likely now. Okay. I think we're seeing definitely less evidence of that. And Howard said that it's not so much about deliberately as deliberately making the decision not to spend the money to upgrade your processes, for instance. I mean, there are still firms out there that are wandering up and down corridors with pieces of paper, which is not very effective, but equally there are still some small businesses out there writing their invoices in the back of cigarette packets, and I know that for sure. So we've kind of got to bring everybody together and change that and make it more efficient and effective for people to help themselves to get paid too. There was 2019, quite a long time ago, a survey, I can't remember by whom, showed that 47% of invoices went in with mistakes on. Now, we can't afford, as a small business sector, to allow that to keep happening either, because that contributes to not getting paid on time. And I don't want to see that. But equally, some of the technology is not helping, because if there's a dot where there should be a comma, the digitization is not working, where a human might say, well, obviously there's a dot and it should be a comma, we'll pay it and sort it out later. So there's all of this in the mix that we need to deal with, so many different moving parts. We just need, I think, to get through to people the value, the real bottom line of getting that money to small businesses faster, and what that would really mean to the economy and the wider society.
Okay, I was just curious to what extent it was a systems and processes problem versus a cynicism problem, and it sounds like it's not so much a cynicism problem. It's never zero,
I mean, this is something we could argue forever, because somebody will have had an experience where it was a cynicism problem. But the other point to make is that as the economy worsens, it does sometimes mean that payments get later, because somebody is saying, we've got to conserve that cash, otherwise we'll go bust and we won't be paying. So, and we have seen a bit of that since coming out of COVID, because during the pandemic things got better, after the pandemic things got worse. Other countries in Europe are not that much better than we are. And some of them, like Germany, has been marginally better, but partly because the economy hasn't quite been at the same level as ours. We're now seeing those payments extend because the German economy is beginning to struggle a bit. So there are, again, all those moving factors that come in. One thing that could be done is that if big firms want to contract with big government to tender for big government contracts, then they should get their payment practices in order. If they're not in order, they shouldn't be allowed to contract in future, and I think that would start to make a difference. Also, if firms were having to put it into their annual reports what their payment practices were, so everybody could see that, I think we'd start to see a difference, or if it was brought into the audit process.
Understood. Okay, Howard, you were waving.
I'm just going to make 2 points on that. My experiences in the construction sector and in some of the FM sector as well, things like waste management, there certainly is a bit of stretching going on where people will get, I don't want to mention any names, be very careful, but people will sometimes get paid to do a job and then put off starting for a month to stretch the money, you know, that way, and then be also stretching their payments, you know, to the subcontractors. And I've had the experience of subcontractors coming to me when I was in business and saying, you know, I can't do this thing you want me to do because although you've paid, you know, person A for it, by the time it gets down to me at level C actually doing the job, I've not got the money, which means I can't afford to actually get the truck in to do the thing. So I've had to go and sort that out, you know, inside the process. So construction and some of the other sectors got a particular problem.
Luckily enough, construction doesn't come under me.
The other point I would make is absolutely, you're absolutely right. And back to the fear factor, and this is where we get to play the equaliser job, which is that the fear factor the other way is that if you are a large company and you supply the GLA, TfL, our family with services, and you get complaints against you for late payment of your subcontractors, and you're not adhering to our expectations, which we can write into the contract, you know, it's we do have an issue in terms of how we procure. In terms of the Fujitsu argument, but we can write into the contract how we expect you to behave. If you don't behave that way, you're not fulfilling that contract. Then not only are there then penalties and things that we can do while you have that contract, but then you fail to deliver a contract with us, and that gives us the power to then not work with you again. So we can put the fear the other way. That as a big buyer, we can work with companies that are the best in the market, and where they fail, then we can have sanctions against them.
You mentioned construction, and I'm looking here at the bar chart from the Federation of Small Business report. I don't know if that's what you were going to say, Laura.
I was going to, yes.
Good sector.
I understand the sector quite a bit as well. I was in that sector some years ago. So late payments actually is one of the highest in construction sector, and it's only gotten worse, even with our small business index and also the Time is Money report. Construction industry in the period we measured from January to December 2022, late payments were reported by 64% of those in the industry, and that's just insane. And as Howard mentioned, it's just extending those start dates, because often enough, depending on what part of the industry you're in construction, you could have different stages depending on the construction phase. And if those phases get pushed by months, sometimes half a year, many years, then those payments get delayed. And often enough, those payments go to subcontractors or small firms. So the implications of that are just significant. But yeah, construction industry is one of the, in my experience and feedback, has such an issue for such a long time. So that is really in kind of the culture and DNA of the industry. So hopefully it's gotten better and better. So, and I think with the government support and the support from the mayor's office and the assembly as well, whatever we can do to improve the situation, not just in construction, but any other area of business, would be just so impactful.
Yeah, I mean, just to say, I have the bar chart in front of me. So construction was 64% in that period. Only education, I don't know why they're so bad, but anyway, education was the only one that was worse.
69%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Apparently you want to be contracting with financial and insurance activities, where only 18% reported being late. So that's apparently they're good at managing money, or at least paying out. So I didn't want to spend too long on this, but Liz, did you want to quickly add a thing on this?
Just briefly, sometimes if you look at companies that are extending their payment terms, you can see who's going bust next.
Yes.
And we have seen 47% increase in insolvencies in the construction sector. So although it doesn't directly come under me, we do have a lot of signatories to the Prompt Payment Code, and we're watching very closely. And you can sometimes see where the next failures
are. Flag popping up. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Laura.
Just to add to that, it's more of the talk within the industry as well. Often enough, some firms actually delay and continue postponing those payments, or hoping actually that some of the firms will go out of business, so then they don't have to pay them, which is such a sad thing to hear from the industry.
Well, my question was about cynicism, so that's a very good, or appropriate, perhaps I should say.
I remain hopeful.
To finish
I
off.
Still remain hopeful.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Before we move on, I have a question, excuse me, for Liz. Liz, first of all, thank you for the timely biology lesson for us politicians regarding anatomy. Secondly, you talked about legislation and it becoming, not something that's necessary if you can't, if there's no way of making the measurements that you need to make. So therefore, what do you think needs to happen in terms of those measurements? How can measurements take place appropriately so that they can then be enforced?
I'm not saying that legislation isn't necessary, because it's an ongoing debate and we need to get to the bottom of it. What I am saying is that if the Prompt Payment Code were to be made compulsory, then it would be compulsory to pay in 30 days for small businesses and 60 days for big businesses. So actually we wouldn't need anybody to sign up to the codes. That's the point I was trying to make. But if we got the measures right, then we'd know what we were measuring. My biggest worry at the moment is that we're measuring different things. So when the data reporting scheme is reporting, it's not the same as the signatories to the code are reporting, which is not the same as the Cabinet Office reporting is reporting, if you see what I mean. And I think if we can get those measures right, then we know we've got data that is interoperable, that is credible, that has integrity, and then we can really start measuring. And if we know what we're measuring, then we can start to think about how we could enforce against legislation that would evaluate that.
So effectively, you're calling for a standardisation of measuring. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would like 30 days to be... I'd like to know what 30 days means. I'd like to know when the clock starts ticking, and I'd like to know everybody was measuring the same thing.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much. Assembly Member Boff.
Most of these grey hairs came after opening a small business and realising that taking a client to court for late payment is not a great way of building a business relationship. So I've empathised with a lot of what you've said on the panel here today. Mr. Dawber, my colleague, Assembly Member Fortune, reminded the Mayor back in December that the GLA's payment record to small business is particularly poor. In fact, it's declined. Under the previous mayor, it declined from about 93-94%, and it's now, for 2022-23, is 74%. What's being put in place to address that, please?
Okay, well, there's two things there. One is that we are working within the GLA family to improve our processes in terms of speed of payment across the board. We are comparing best practice with our colleagues that have got it at the right level. And I think actually Alex has got the figures in terms of the family and who's paying, who's actually meeting the commitment. The 90% of contracts paid within 10 days is our own very high target, and in the last figures at the end of 23-24 we hit 83.9%. So it got steadily better over the course of last year. It's still not quite where we'd like it to be, obviously. If it's useful, I don't know whether it's useful here or a bit later to talk about why we've got 83.9%, not 90%, because we've done some research into that, and the reasons.
Sorry, what that's 89% relate?
83.9.
83% of.
That's GLA itself.
the GLA itself, so the last figures we got for 2022-23 were 74%. Has that meant
it's
that
gone
there
up.
has
It's
been an
gone up to 83.9. So 83.9 is the latest figure. But after attending that assembly session and talking to the mayor and team, the mayor is absolutely committed to being the most pro-business mayor ever, and that includes paying small businesses on time. So we did some research into what was behind that figure and why we weren't hitting 90%, and we'll share this data with the assembly. But the vast majority of where we hadn't hit the target, there are currently 158 outstanding invoices from SMEs outside the 10-day target. And the vast majority of those are because of something wrong with the invoice. And it's back to that point that Liz made, that where the invoice, for example, the biggest single number is that the invoice didn't include the PO number. Once that happens, it goes into the system, and even where we're able to catch it within that 10 days, it's then not possible to get the SME to reissue it in time to meet the 10-day target. So nearly all the cases where we've failed to pay within the 10 days are because there was something wrong with the invoice when it went to the system. Not all of them. There are a few. There's about 10% of those that are missed where it was a sign-off issue, and that comes back to this issue of if there's one person with sign-off permission on that particular budget line item, and they happen to be away, or for whatever reason they're not able to get to that within the time to get the invoice signed off within 10 days, that will cause an issue. So that's something we're looking at to see if we can improve that. But what we are doing is that instead of going, there's something wrong with that invoice, what can we do about it? We're going back to the suppliers to make sure that they fill it in right next time. So we're actively helping the small business suppliers to make sure that this doesn't happen. So once it's happened once, we work hard to make sure it doesn't happen a second time, that they're giving us all the information on the invoice to be able to pay it. We've set up an alarm system so that when it hits 10 days, alarm bells ring within not literally, but within the system, to flag up onto the desks of the people with responsibility, and that has helped to again look at what happened on that particular instance, to go back and make sure it doesn't happen a second time. And I'm pleased to say that although we're not quite hitting the targets in terms of paying within 10 days, where we get to 30 days, we believe we are hitting nearly all of the invoices. That figure's being produced right now. Again, the system doesn't create that as easily as you might think, so we're working on that, and we'll share that with you as well to make sure that you've got a full picture of where we're hitting 10, but also where we're hitting 30, which is obviously the prompt payment charter target. The other thing I'd say is we are contracting with a lot more SMEs than we used to. So our target for the GLA itself, for example, for contracting with SMEs is 30% of spend. We're actually hitting 58% of spend. So we're actually much better than we did before. And that means that we're actually dealing with a lot more invoices. So the previous figures where we were hitting sort of 74%, and before that previous mayor, we're actually on a much lower run rate of invoices with SMEs as well. So we're doing better than we were with more contracts, but we're not quite hitting 90% yet. And without going into further detail on that, our target is to hit 90%. That's what I'm going to try and make sure happens.
Your target is 89% to your 90%?
90%.
90%. You suggested that there was a disparity between different members of the GLA family. Is that something that you can share with us?
Alex has got the figures here if you want to go through, because some of the parts of the GLA are hitting 90%. So TFL is hitting 90%.
Did in 21-22. It's just under at the moment.
And the LFB was doing very well a couple of years ago, now isn't. And then the total across the whole family is 74.4. The GLA itself has got up in the latest figures to 83.9. We'll share these figures with you.
So across the GLA family, it's 74%.
Yeah.
But the GLA itself,
so
is 89. So we're
core
still
mayor's office bit,
So we're still pretty poor. So that's not an improvement on the 74%. So the GLA family is still very much at 74%.
And that is attributable largely to a fall, which I don't know the reasons for. We can find out from the fire brigade. The others are all kind of on an upward trend. Fire brigade in the last quarter has gone down a lot. I don't know why that would be.
Right.
Yeah, so just in terms of the GLA itself, we were at 79.9% in 2021. We're now at 83.9%.
And that's just the GLA proportion,
itself,
not the wider GLA family.
Yeah.
That's a pretty poor record.
It's not where we like to be, that's for certain. But like I said, if you look into the detail of that, I mean, we're talking about figures of tens of invoices in some cases. So that skews the figures in a way that isn't necessarily helpful in just looking at the overall number. There's no question we want to get above 90%. Let's start with that.
Yeah.
We need to get there. We're not there. We will get there. But when we look at then what is the reasons for some of those late payments, we were talking yesterday about one of our longest outstanding payments. We have a payment, the longest single one I think is £400, which is 2 years overdue. But we can't now find the supplier. So we'd really like to pay it. If we were a private sector body, we'd just write that off. Yeah. But we can't now get them to engage with us to give them the payment details for that. So we'd really like to pay it. We don't want to write it off, and I don't think it's appropriate that we do write it off. Like I said, in the private sector, you just go, they're never going to ask for the money, just park it. But we can't because we're being responsible. But it's things like that will then skew the figures against how fast we're paying. So it's going down to individual payments where, like I said, it's something's been wrong with the invoice, and that's caused it to not be paid within the 10 days. We go back to people so it doesn't happen a second time. But we're dealing with quite a large number of small suppliers.
I had a client who took 2 years to pay for an invoice once. Perhaps it's me. But I don't know.
Well, actually, I better check.
Just trying.
Yeah.
Let's just be clear on those figures. Does the figures relate, that percentage figure, the 80 something that 83 or something you 83.9. You're very good at decimal points, Assembly Member Garrett. So that 83.9, that relates to 83.9% of invoices or spend?
It's invoices paid as of period 10 in 23-24, so that's basically December last year. So that's the percentage of
invoices themselves, yes, rather than the value of those invoices. The Mayor's been promising this for quite a while. Do you see that you're going to be a new broom?
I don't think I'm a new broom. Maybe a Trigger's new head or new broom handle. But I joined in December. This is something we are going to concentrate on. Like I said, not just the paying on time, but also expanding the number of SMEs that we contract with. It's something that is very important to the Mayor. It's something that he's asked me to have a look at as champion of small business. It's something that we as a team are very focused on. And like I said, we've given ourselves quite a tough target, way beyond what not all, but some of the rest of the public sector is doing. We want to get to that 10%, and then we'd like to go further. But it is a little bit like turning a the proverbial oil tank around. It requires a lot of focus on the systems. It requires a lot of working with the SMEs to make sure that they're filling in the invoices right so that the system delivers a fast response to them. But we are absolutely determined to make sure it does happen.
Yes, there must be institutional memory of this because the previous mayor managed to hit that target every year.
I'd have to look back at his figures, but comparatively, I suspect that was with a relatively smaller number of SMEs. But so we're working with more SMEs now than then, and that's not a. I don't wish to cast aspersions on the previous mayor or his procurement practices, but clearly the two things go hand in hand. We want to spend more money with local businesses, and also to treat them very well when we're contracting with them.
How does you alluded to it earlier, so perhaps the answer to this might be quite brief. How does the GLA group monitor the payment practices of its suppliers towards subcontractors? You did mention it earlier. I don't know if we got it.
Yeah,
would you mind, Mr. Conway? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sir. So there is, and I think finance colleagues have talked to the audit panel about some of this before. We have sort of improved, at the behest of the mayor, kind of made some big changes to how we make our payments. There was a new payment system that was introduced around this time last year, and we had a whole set of training and guidance to help that bed in. There is, as Howard alluded to, alert that now goes out. I receive it saying these are the payments that have not been made within 10 days, and everybody at my level, assistant director level, will get that along with the monthly performance reporting and the actions needed for the team. We've got a particular email inbox for internal approvers to respond to queries, and I'll say that was actually a bit of a...
These are your practices?
Yeah.
I'm talking about your subcontractors' practices.
Oh, the subcontractors, I'm so sorry.
I beg your pardon.
Sorry for picking that. So in the... well, again, Howard alluded to that as well, and all I can say is, so my experience as from when we have procured contracts is that we can put into the contracts requirements that subcontractors get paid promptly and that the contractor adheres to responsible procurement.
How often have you had to have a word with a contractor because of their payment practices to subcontractors?
So I am aware of so in looking at my experience of European programmes, that has been something that's been flagged, and we have addressed it with the contractor. So that there are definitely examples where that's happened. The final thing I just wanted to mention is that responsible procurement is a very big part of the work which the committee will be aware of that we do as part of our London Anchors Institutions network. We've got a big event in a couple of days here at City Hall, and that maybe just come back to sort of Abdul's point about, well, we're trying to follow some best practice here, and we're also trying to encourage big employers elsewhere in London, including the NHS that we've talked about, including universities, boroughs and so on, to do the same thing. So that's an important part of the Anchor programme, that actually responsible procurement and those bodies increasing the amount of procurement they do through SMEs is a really big part of that story.
Thank you. A report from the GLA auditors in July 2023 that noted that additional training was being provided to the poorest performing teams to further improve GLA performance. Has this training taken place?
So, in respect
of the system you use, SAP, Dawber, guided.
Again, might be something where we might need a bit of clarity from the sort of finance and procurement colleagues responsible for it. As far as I'm aware, that training has taken place.
Has taken place.
Yeah, but let me check that. With the
Thank you. If you can get back to us on that. Finally, what's the? I'm roundabout. I think I've covered our set questions. What is the current total outstanding amount of late payments owed by the GLA?
So we've dug out some figures on this. As of yesterday, there are 158 invoices from SMEs.
What's the value of those?
158 outside the 10-day target, with a value of £1.78 million.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Could I ask you a question, Deputy Mayor? We've heard about the different lead-in times to make payments throughout this morning, and anything from 10 days at the GLA to 120 days or beyond with others. And you've said that the GLA is very good, and you've given the figures for meeting targets within 30 days. Is 10 days a standard time, do you think, or is that quite unusual?
Well, I haven't actually given the 30-day figure yet because we're working on that, but we will share that with the committee because I think it's very important to have that as effectively our backstop date, is that we meet the prompt payment code and that we are within that 30 days, and then our own internal target of the 10 days becomes the sort of Rolls-Royce standard. I think 10 days is having looked through the way the procurement system works, and again this issue of when invoices arrive and then are actually logged on the system. So an invoice might be issued on a day, arrives the following day, logged into the system the third day. If you've also, sorry, we're talking about 10 working days as well. Let's be clear about that, not 10 days including weekends. But you can get to a point where the system only actually starts processing the invoice 2 or 3 days after it's been issued. The other thing we have is that sometimes invoices arrive after the date that's on the invoice. So small businesses, and I appreciate this as well, and those members who've run or worked with small businesses will also know that you don't always get round to issuing the invoice on the specific day that the invoice is due. So it might have a technical due date, a technical issue date, but it might actually get sent a couple of days later. So given all that, I think 10 days for now is a reasonable target for us to stick to. I appreciate the 5 days. Where I think we can do some work, both in terms of our own payment and in other public sector, is where it's a regular payment. So where a supplier is regularly issuing invoices on a weekly basis, and they're a trusted supplier, they're on the system, they're clearly providing an ongoing service, then I think you can get into much faster payment, as opposed to a one-off, if you have a speaker at an event or catering for an event where you're using a company you've never used before, it's the first time on the system, it's a line item where somebody specific who doesn't normally sign off that sort of invoice has to sign it off. That you can see where that might be a bit more slow. So what we will do, and what I'll commit to do today, is we're going to benchmark ourselves against other local authorities in London, against national government and other devolved institutions, and then also against our friends and colleagues across the Anchor Institutions Network. So we want to be, back to your point about the shining example, we want to be at the top of that list. We want to be able to demonstrate that we're putting our money literally where our mouth is and that we're among the best. So we will benchmark ourselves there, and where we can support other people to try and get up to that level as well. But 30 days as a backstop, and 10 days as our sort of big achievement target.
Thank you, and thank you for the correction. You're quite right. You said that you're very good at waiting for the figures. We look forward to receiving those figures regarding the 30 days. Could I also ask you about the effectively training that you are giving to suppliers? You said that at the beginning of one of your answers that a lot of the times, 90% of the times for late payments is because there's a problem with the invoice, and often you refer to a PO number hasn't been put on, and that you are actually then going back and trying to ensure that in future, if that organisation puts an invoice, that doesn't happen. Have you got any figures to show how effective that sort of just making sure that people do it properly is for the next time?
I don't to hand, but I think the fact that we're seeing an incremental improvement in the payment times shows that things are getting better. And like I said, the late payments, and we'll share the internal research we've done on this with you. the late payments aren't because we don't want to pay on time. They're not because we've done something wrong in the system. It's because in almost, like I said, 90% of the cases, it's because there was something wrong with the invoice. And these are small things that are often easily fixed, but it does require to go back and talk to the supplier about, doing it right the next time, reissuing the invoice correctly. But we can have a look. We can talk to colleagues who are working on the front line here and see where we've got examples of how that's improved. The first one comes in wrong, the second one's right, and then that's that supplier fixed effectively. So we can come back with some details on that. But it's one of those learning things that as you go through the process and you realise that it's the small details that often make the difference between getting it paid within 10 days or not. It's an iterative process, and it's a learning process which we're on to try and get to 190%.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The final question that we have for today's session is for Kate, Laura and Abdul. What action would you like to see the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor for Business take to improve payment practices for small businesses and the self-employed across London? Abdul, perhaps we could start with you. And ignore the fact that he's sitting right next to you.
So I think that most of it is an educational piece for businesses. So the Mayor has, has a massive social following. So the Mayor championing this, talking about this regularly, putting it out there, businesses, it's important for you guys to pay on time. Using his platform to speak to small businesses, posting it on his socials, speaking about it, that's important. But also the GLA leading by example, that would be great as well. Ensuring that Deputy Mayor is working on increasing the fact that they're able to pay their payments, faster. The support that for us, again, it goes down to we work with CCGs, and hopefully can we get them to pay quicker? Can we get the Deputy Mayor involved? Can we get the Mayor involved to make that an issue? I would definitely sort of love that from our perspective. So that's the only bit I'd probably add from my side.
Thank you. Kate?
Thank you. Would agree with a lot of those comments and suggestions too. And, first of all, lobbying the government and all the things that we want to see changes in legislation would obviously be extremely welcome. But more specific to London, the majority of our members, our self-employed members in particular, are based in London. We did a report a few years ago with the Centre for London on London self-employed workforce, and within that we was encouraging the adoption of a client charter of good practice by London employers who contract self-employed workers. That would kind of go even further than a creative freelance charter, which I believe there's been commitments for. But within that, sort of challenging these bad practices and making sure that we stamp out late payments in terms of that campaign and that leadership would be really powerful. And as Laura mentioned, the prompt payment city, I really like that phrase. And if we could have that specific campaigning to pay self-employed workers on time in particular, and for last-minute cancellations as well, that would send a really strong message on sort of poor client practices, and that in London it's not acceptable, and it's something that the Mayor is extremely committed to stamping out. I think that would be quite a powerful campaigning voice and message to send. And then we as unions and membership organisations can work together with the Mayor and the GLA to encourage employers to get on board and sign up to charters or whatever that might look like, so we can send a really strong united messages that we won't accept late payments in any way, shape or form.
Thank you, Kate. Laura?
Thank you, and yes, I agree on the prompt payment capital, which is great, and then for Mayor to advocate that and be quite vocal, because they do lead by example. So that would be part of tackling this issue as well, and making it very clear that it's not acceptable, especially even more so for large businesses in the capital, not to pay small firms first, and use that capital that they're holding back often enough for their own working capital to invest in their businesses, because they're actually holding back the communities and the larger economy that way. But also for the Mayor to try and push more for those undisputed and valid invoices to paid even sooner. So we really appreciate all the work you guys are doing on that as well, and maybe even giving newer, smaller firms who are becoming part of that procurement part some clear guidance from the start that make sure that these are the main issues that we usually face with invoices, to try and avoid those, but also for any other invoices that you receive to be paid within those 30 days. That would be the main asks, and I know you guys are working hard on that, so it's really appreciated, and we always call for collaborative work, so thank you.
Thank you. And Liz, you're not on my list, but would you like to add anything to that?
Of course.
Thought you might.
I absolutely agree with everything that's been said. I think the communication is lacking somewhere if there are mistakes on invoices. I think anybody coming on board, the induction should be much better at making them understand what makes an invoice payable. So anything we can do to make invoices payable right from the beginning. But there's also one point I want to make, and this may sound a bit pedantic. The use of SMEs as a term does not help anybody. And I think we've got to drop that somewhere. We want to know how you're treating your small businesses, your micro businesses, your freelancers, your sole traders. By lumping them all together in SMEs, you could actually be treating most people as a medium-sized business. And a medium-sized business will have a finance controller of some sort. The small businesses won't. The micro businesses are definitely not going to. And the sole traders doing it all themselves, the freelancers doing it all themselves. So I think we need to make a bit more of a differentiation here and really make sure that that induction, those comms around about it, is really spot on right from the beginning. And can we stop calling it prompt payment? I want fair and fast payments. I don't want prompt at 120 days. That's no earthly good, because Abdul's gone bust by then. So we want really concentrating, and I think language matters.
Is it okay to add just one last thing to point out that our small businesses would really appreciate? As part of procurement processes, if they don't win the bid, they would really need feedback, which they're lacking, so they know how to win that contract at least next time.
Thank you very much. We've now reached the end of the session, and I'd like to thank our... Sorry,
No, I thought how good a session.
All right, thank you. I was just about to say that, Assembly Member Bob. You stole the words out of my mouth. Thank you. So I'd like to thank our guests for, it really was a very interesting session, and it's an issue that has, I think you've shone a great deal of light on. So thank you to our guests, Laura Tim, Kate Dearden, Liz Barclay, Abdul Shiil, Deputy Mayor Howard Dawber and Alex Conway for attending and making it such an interesting session. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion?
Noted.
Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the discussion?
Agreed.
The next meeting of the committee will be confirmed at the London Assembly's annual meeting in May 2024, so it does feel a bit like end of term. I have no more urgent business, which concludes today's meeting, other than... Sorry, I'm just looking to see. So I'd just like the committee to note that Emma Bowden, who is sitting over there and has been doing absolutely sterling work for the GLA in the press team for the last few years. It's her last economy meeting today, and she's moving for some bizarre reason to the BBC. So I'd like to wish you luck on behalf of the committee, Emma, and thank you for everything that you've done.
Is that a demotion, Chair? There must be a demotion.
I can't comment on that. So thank you, Emma. Yes, can we have a round of applause for her? And I'd like it, if you can stay, panel, just for a moment, we'd like to take a photo with you as well. Thank you very much.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.